For part 2 of making a door, we obviously have to have the dust collector running for this machine. Otherwise we get this cloud of death coming out the front. So forgive me if you have a lot of background noise. The door is out of the clamps, and we took a scraper and kind of scraped everywhere some glue had squeezed out on the face. Now I don't care about that as far as, you know, wiping it off with a wet rag or anything like that. We just scrape it off because it's all going to be sanded off anyway. You notice that I didn't run it through a planer yet, so it's nice and thick. Now we're going to run it through the wide belt sander until we get it to the proper thickness. Okay, it's already set to go, and I've got on the rough sandpaper on the belt. It's about 80 grit, so it's nice and rough and coarse. Now, which side of the door is your front? Traditionally, this is the front because it has that decorative edge on it. However, right now as I'm recording this, the style that's in right now is shaker style, which means there's no decoration, which basically is the back of the door. That's our shaker style door. Depending on which side is going to be seen as the front, we're going to sand that side less. So let's say this is a shaker style door. Great, I'm going to use the back of the door as the front. I'm only going to sand with the rough this part enough to get these joints nice and flush, and then sand the front the rest of the time, because I want to keep this ledge. If this was the front of the door, the traditional side, then I would have the same thinking, but only do this side less and sand more on the back. So for now, I'm just going to sand both sides till they're both flush. Then I will only sand this side, the side with the decorative, the back side, until I get it to the thickness that I'm after. The thickness we're going for is about 0.850, give or take. And that's written right here on the front. 850 is my first run with rough. Then I'll switch out the belt for fine grit and then sand both sides down to my final thickness. But because that belt is so rough, I can raise the table 3 taps per pass with this belt only. So I can still see that it didn't quite get all of it on this front side. So we'll do it one more time and then only sand this side for the rest. All right, the dial says I'm at 850 exactly. Now I need to swap out the belt. Now I'm not going to show how that's done on this video, but I will show you individually in class. I've swapped the belt. Now we're going to sand down to 0.790, which is also written right here on the front. So you have your numbers. With a finer grit, you can usually do 1, maybe 2 taps per pass, 2 raises. Because this is poplar, it's relatively soft. With a harder wood, just 1 per pass. But again, I'm going to do the front side first. Once I feel that that is all smooth and done, I'm not going to sand anymore. I'll only sand the back side from here on out. That feels pretty good. I'm only going to do this side the rest of the time. The door is now sanded to the right thickness, and they are nice and smooth on both sides. One last thing I wanted to point out is I know I'm only sanding one door at a time just for the demonstration, but I would expect that you would have quite a stack of doors. This is a stack of doors for one kitchen that I'm building somewhere else for another job. This is one kitchen. I'm only doing one. Get a bunch of doors stacked up as you're using the sander. Sanding one door at a time will take forever. So get a whole bunch of them ready, send them all through at the same time, one right after another, then change the thickness and do it all over again. It'll immensely speed up the process. Now that we've got a bunch of your doors sanded to the right thickness, now we have to cut it to size. When we originally glued these together, we made them 1/4 of an inch too long and 1/4 of an inch too wide. So that gives us room to square it up. So what we have to do is remove about 1/8 of an inch on all 4 sides, and that'll be the right size. That allows me to square it and size it at the same time. So how do we do that? First step, pretend this is just a piece of wood. What's the first step of squaring a board? Joint an edge. We need a good edge. So we come over to the jointer. Doesn't matter which face is in or out, but you're going to joint one edge. We can't joint the end grain. It's going to blow it out this way, so we can only do an edge. And I've got this set to 1/8 of an inch. Now remember, you only get to do this once, because I've now removed 1/8 of an inch from this piece. If I do it twice, then the door is almost exactly to the proper width, but there's no way for me to know if it's exactly parallel with the other edge, because now I've removed that 1/4 of an inch. I can't cut the other one, and this one's a lot smaller than this one. We don't want that. So now that I have my 1/8 inch cut off, I usually will take a pencil and just put a mark. That tells me that's a cut edge, it's a good edge. Now we need to remove an end. And like I said, we can't use the jointer. We can't joint this way because this end grain right here is going to blow off the back. I mean, it'll just shred it right off of there. So we can't have that. It has to be cut on a table saw. On the table saw in the back, I have this crosscut sled specifically made to make this kind of cut. We take the edge that has the line on it right here. We put that edge against the fence towards my body, and then I just slide it up to the blade. Now the blade teeth are 1/8 of an inch wide, so I want to remove a blade width off the end. Now I don't want to have 1/8 of an inch off the other side of the blade, so I'm cutting that and throwing that away. So if I have it set properly, I should have almost nothing left but sawdust. So a blade width only. Slide that in 1/8 of an inch and cut off a blade width. So now I mark here, and I know that this corner and this corner, this side, are exactly 90 degrees from each other. They're perpendicular. Now I actually go and get some measurements and cut a length and cut a width on the other table saw. We come to the other table saw, and now I will have a cut list in front of me telling me exactly the size of the door. If I've done my cuts correctly, I should only be removing about a blade width off of the remaining 2 edges. So if you set up your door and you're ready to cut and notice, oh, I'm taking off almost an inch, then your measurement's wrong. Something is not correct. Double check that. You should only be shaving the edges off to get that remaining 1/8 inch. So I looked at my measurements and I'm double checking. Sure enough, my width needs to be 15 3/4. And I right now have 15 7/8, and that is 1/8 of an inch cut. That's perfect. So 15 3/4, right there. And now I'm putting the edge that has the line I drew from the jointer against the fence. So I'm cutting off the remaining edge. Make sure to keep that door nice and tight to the fence. The door will tend to want to wander to the left. It always does. So that is now cut to the proper width. Now I turn it. There's the other line I drew, so I know that's been cut, and I double check my measurement. It said it needed to be 23 3/4, and it is 23 7/8, so the same thing. 23 3/4 for this particular cut. And as I put it in, I see that I'm just going to be shaving the edge. Perfect. Take your time on the cut, because when you come out, you get a little bit of tear out. The faster you go, the more tear out you're going to get, and then that kind of has to be sanded or worked out. So now your door is cut to the exact right width. The faces, this is already sanded with a fine grit, so I don't need to worry about the face anymore. But the edges have now been trimmed with a blade, and there's a lot of teeth marks. Now we're going to sand those edges, and then we're almost ready for lacquer. In the back of the shop at the edge sander, we're going to sand all the edges. The idea is to reduce as much sanding as possible by hand. Now the faces are done like we mentioned before because the Y-Belt had fine grit. It's the ends. They feel very rough, and the edges I know were cut on a table saw, so those teeth marks have to be sanded off. So we're going to use this to do it all at the same time. For the ends, put it against this board down at the end and just hold it in till it feels smooth to your touch. The best thing you can do is just look really close. Do I see any teeth marks, any edges that are going to show up? If you do, of course, sand some more. If not, it looks good, then we're ready for the next step. Now we're moving on to the final step before we can put primer or lacquer or color on it, is final sanding. Like I said, the faces are sanded, the edges are now sanded. Now we have sharp corners to take care of. And that has to be done by hand. If you use a sander, yeah, it'll take the corners right off, but it'll be too much. So don't use an electric. Just use your hand, and we're just taking off the sharp edges enough so that when I feel it, it doesn't feel sharp like a knife. But it still looks square. That's the key. I want it to look square, but not be sharp. Lacquer doesn't like sharp edges. When you lacquer it on, that's where it's sure to crack off pretty quickly if it isn't rounded a little. Now the outside edges are done here, but I have to do the inside right here as well. Just a few swipes. Doesn't take a whole lot. We're just getting rid of that really sharp edge. Good, backside's done. Flip it over and do the same thing. While I'm sanding all these sharp edges off, I'm also looking at the door, looking for any defects that need to be covered. For example, here's a little knot on this side. I see a couple of little knots. Are they open? So if I look closely, that one might be, it's tiny, but it might be open. These are closed, that one's closed, that one's closed, but this one is still open. So I'll zoom in a little bit right there. There is an actual opening in there. So when I lacquer that, it's going to go down into that opening and make a big hole. So we got to putty it. If I'm coloring the doors with paint, doesn't matter the color of putty. Just go over it like that. And I'll do that one on the back just in case. Right there. Just a touch there. This putty should take maybe 5 to 10 minutes to dry. I didn't put on very much. A light sanding on that just to take off all that extra that I put on. And we're ready for lacquering.